Hey, seventh grade, Mr. Herbst here. Hope this finds you guys all doing well. This is your second chapter that we're going to be doing via distance learning. I hope the first chapter, I'm assuming the first chapter went well, but you guys haven't done it yet, so it's hard to know. But I wanted to get another chapter worth of lecture taped and get posted onto YouTube. So here it is. This chapter that we are doing now is still we're dealing with plants. And in this chapter, we're talking about different processes within plants like photosynthesis and cellular respiration and then how plants reproduce. Okay, so the first section, 10.1, is about how energy processes in plants. Okay, now we know that there's obviously relationships going on between plants and animals, right? Animals need oxygen, plants need carbon dioxide, and so there's this nice little exchange back and forth where it works out really well. We provide carbon dioxide. Lots of things provide carbon dioxide, but as we exhale out carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide can be taken up by plants, and they can use that through the process of photosynthesis to turn it into a sugar molecule, and then they return oxygen back through the leaves to us. We'll get to that in just a second here. Okay, so photosynthesis then is just the set of chemical reactions that is converting energy from the sun along with some water and carbon dioxide, and it turns that into glucose. Okay, now if you recall, we've talked about glucose a lot of times in the past. Glucose is just a sugar molecule. Okay, there's different types of sugar molecules. Some are glucose, some sucrose, fructose. You probably have heard of these at some point or another. Glucose is just regular old sugar. Okay, sucrose would be like table sugar. Okay, so when this process happens, energy from the sun goes into the chloroplast, right? And that's in the leaves of the plants. And what gives it the green color, it strikes the chloroplast, and in the thylakoids, or the little tiny, we don't need to go into the details, but inside the thylakoid membrane inside of the chloroplast is where this photosynthesis is actually occurring, okay? And again, it requires carbon dioxide and water from the environment, okay? Carbon dioxide comes into the leaves through the stoma, which is the opening in the leaves, if you remember, and then water is coming in through the roots. So as CO2 comes in, here's the stoma, and you remember the guard cells are responsible for opening and closing that opening so that stuff can come in and out. And after the process is all done, water and oxygen will come out. Now, not at the same time. Oxygen is one of the waste products of photosynthesis, but water comes out after cellular respiration. Okay, that process is called transpiration. Okay, so this is what the leaf actually looks like, and we looked at a picture of the cross section of the leaf before in the previous chapter, but we'll go over it again here. The epidermis then, kind of like humans also have an epidermis. This is the thin outer layer on the outside of the skin. It's really thin, and it allows for sun to be able to shine through. Then there's a waxy cuticle. Here's the epidermis here. And then the waxy cuticle is right on top of that, this light green stuff. That helps to prevent water loss from occurring. Okay, obviously plants want to hold on to as much water as they can. Sometimes some of it has to be released as a waste product of cellular respiration. Okay, and then if you remember, the stomata or the stoma is this opening for gas exchange, right? Carbon dioxide comes in, oxygen then goes out. Okay, then there's a spongy layer right down in here. This is the spongy layer. Carbon dioxide and water fill up in that layer so that it can be used later on. And then there's also the palisade layer right here. And this is where the food is made, okay? All right, so the chloroplast is one of the organelles we talked about when we first started learning about cells. It's one of the organelles that plant cells have that animal cells don't have, and it has a green pigment, and we call that pigment chlorophyll. Its only job is to trap light energy and assist, well, the whole organelle assists then in the process of photosynthesis, okay? Water molecules get split apart through this process, and then when they split apart, oxygen molecules are released back out to the atmosphere. Okay, just a minute ago, I was talking about the thylakoids. These are these little disc-looking structures inside the chloroplast, and these stacks are what we call grana, or an individual one would be a grana. The whole stack many of them would be granum. It's in this little tiny thin membrane where this process is happening. Okay, so carbon dioxide from the air gets changed into a sugar molecule, and then that sugar molecule gets taken elsewhere to be used. We'll talk about that in a second. But plants use that sugar as their energy source. Okay, if there is excess sugar, it gets stored, and oftentimes it gets stored in the roots of those plants, and things like beets and carrots and things like that. Now, in order for the mitochondria to use that sugar molecule, it needs to be broken down a little bit more, or changed a little bit, might be a better way of saying it. It needs to be changed a little bit before it can go through the process of cellular respiration, okay? So here's what happens. Sun from the energy, along with carbon dioxide and water, the plants go through photosynthesis, and that creates a sugar molecule. That sugar molecule then goes to the mitochondria, and the mitochondria uses it to make adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And we'll get to the details of that in just a minute, okay? So humans, or animals, as opposed to plants, animals consume food, and that food through the digestive process turns into sugar molecules. And then those sugar molecules also will go to the mitochondria and go through the process of cellular respiration, okay? Plants don't go around eating things, and there isn't food source in the soil, so they have to rely on the sun and CO2 in order to do this process, okay? All right, so the process then, once we get a sugar molecule that's made, it goes to the mitochondria, and then we have this process of cellular respiration that's going to occur, okay? Chemical reactions converting energy from the food molecules into a usable form of energy. And that usable form, we call it ATP for shorthand, but it's called adenosine triphosphate, okay? All right, the chemical reaction, which you're not going to be responsible to remember, but just very quickly, C6H12O6 is glucose. That's a sugar molecule. And then together with 6 oxygen molecules, okay? So plants need to have oxygen as well. They don't breathe oxygen like animals do, but they do need oxygen in order to do cellular respiration, okay? So after the process or the reaction has occurred, and this is a very long, complex process, this is the very simplistic version of that, we end up with 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules and energy. Okay, the energy part is the thing that the plant is the most interested in. Water and carbon dioxide are waste products, okay? Carbon dioxide will get used again, and the H2O, or the water molecules, are going to be released through the stoma on the leaf, okay? This is happening in the mitochondria. It requires oxygen. It produces CO2 and water as the waste products. All right, so here's just a quick little infographic about the differences between photosynthesis and cellular respiration, okay? Energy from the sun, light energy, shines down, it strikes the chloroplast, it interacts with the thylakoid membranes on the stacks of grana, and allows that to go through the process of photosynthesis, okay? After photosynthesis has occurred, we end up with an oxygen molecule and glucose, okay? This is the sugar molecule that's going to be then taken to the mitochondria, okay? The mitochondria will go through cellular respiration, and it will produce adenosine triphosphate. That's this chemical energy part that we're looking at, ATP. And then the waste products then are from cellular respiration are water and CO2, okay? All right, that was it for 10.1. I know it was kind of quick, but these videos get kind of long, and I recognize that you guys can pause the video and slow it down if you would like to. But in an effort to keep these videos as short as I can, I'm going to be going through them relatively quickly, okay? Again, if you have questions, please let me know. 10.2 is about how plants respond to differences in the environment or changes in the environment or different stimuli that they receive in the environment. So a stimuli is just a change, some sort of a change in the organism's environment. Okay, so where the thing lives, there's some sort of a change in that environment and it causes a response. If it doesn't cause a response, then it's not a stimulus, right? So if you think about something that might be a stimuli, when you go to the doctor's office, sometimes they test your reflexes, right? And maybe they take their little hammer thing and they tap it on the bottom of your knee, and then your leg kind of does this little bounce thing, right? That's a reaction to a stimulus, and they're doing that because they want to test to make sure that the nerves are working the way that they're supposed to, okay? Plants do the same thing, except when you tap them, they don't react like that, but they do react to stimuli in their environment, okay? Now, we call these reactions a tropism, okay? That's the response that a plant has when they are growing towards or away from some sort of a stimulus. Now, this light is representing that big shiny orb that we see up in the sky during the daylight hours, the sun. Now, plants like to grow towards the sun, right? Because that's where they're getting their energy. So if you were to take a plant and you put a lamp by it, and maybe you could try this at home if you've got a plant lying around, go and put a lamp on the side, shine a lamp at it from the side for a couple of days. And I'm guessing you'll find that those plants are going to start growing towards that light. Now, when we were going to do this chapter originally, we would have had some plants here that we would have planted the chapter before, probably grass seed or something like that. And then we can see how this actually works and we can see it happening. Obviously, we don't have that capability this year, so, but unfortunately, but maybe you've got a plant at home that you can try this with. Other things, excuse me, other tropisms or other responses to stimuli would be like touch. Oftentimes when vines start to touch something, they'll start to wrap around it, and that helps to stabilize the plant. Cucumber plants are really good at this. If you have a garden and you grow cucumber plants, you might notice that all the little vines start to wrap around different things, whether it be a blade of grass or another branch or whatever it happens to be. A lot of times people will grow their cucumbers on like hog fencing and things like that, and those little vines will start to wrap around to help stabilize that. Light is another one. Obviously, we know that plants like to grow towards the light. So if you have a plant by a window, it's probably going to start bending towards the light, okay? And when it does that, it's not like the plant is actually bending. What's actually happening on a cellular level, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a second here, the cells themselves are elongating, okay? The cells on the inside are relatively short, and the cells on the outside are elongating in order to make that turn. Gravity is another thing that causes plants to grow or respond to stimuli. Plants will grow up towards the light, and they don't necessarily know where the sun is. I mean, you could take a plant and put it in a relatively dark room or someplace where there's light coming from all around, and you tip it sideways, and it's going to start growing up against gravity. All right, and the next one is what we call photoperiodism. Now, photo refers to light, okay? So if you take a photograph, there has to be light in order to do that. I get it, yeah, there's flash on camera, so we don't need to have light. Yeah, that's true, but we're still creating some sort of light. Without light in the environment, we can't see anything. Therefore, we can't take a picture of anything without light, okay? Photo refers to the sun or light. And so a photoperiod is a period of light or darkness, okay? So photoperiodism is how the plant is responding to those hours of either light or darkness. Some plants really like it, a lot of darkness. Some plants like a lot of daylight, okay? We'll talk about each one. There's 3 different types. The first type is a long day plant. Long day plants need less than 10 to 12 hours of darkness, okay? Darkness. Less than 10 to 12 hours of darkness. That means that it needs to be daylight for long periods of time in order for these plants to grow, okay? Oh, this is a wild prairie plant in Minnesota. It's a black-eyed Susan, if I remember correctly. Okay, short day plants then are plants that need more than 12 hours of darkness. Strawberries are an example of a plant that needs a short day. Okay, so not a whole lot of, or not too much sunlight during the day. Now, in the name, it says short day. If you think about day like daytime, then it's a short day, so there's not a lot of light. Day neutral plants are ones that don't really have any length of daylight that they need. Obviously, all plants need to have some amount of light, but this one's not real specific about how much daylight it receives, okay? So they're neutral. Okay, other things are called that affect how plants will grow or react to stimuli are plant hormones. Those hormones are just things that act as chemical messengers within plants. Now, there are human hormones and animal hormones. You know, inside your body, there are hormones, and those hormones tell different things to do, you know, different stuff, if you will, especially as individuals are growing and maturing. But plants are more specifically messaged by hormones to do one of the following, okay? For the seed to germinate, okay? And that happens when you have a seed that starts to have growth coming from it. That's germination. Growing and maturing, producing flowers, producing fruit, abscission, which is losing the leaves. And then, for and then the seeds, there's another one or other hormones that made the seeds go into a state of dormancy. Auxins are a type of hormone that control the growth of the plants depending on how much light there is. So if we don't have auxins, or those hormones aren't released, the plant isn't going to know that it's time to grow, and those auxins get released as sunlight shines on the plants. Ethylene is a gas that plants produce that make them ripen. Fruits, seeds, flowers, leaves, all of them produce ethylene gas. Oftentimes, I'm going to go ahead one slide here, but then I'll come back. Ethylene gas oftentimes is used in the shipping of fruits, especially if they come from long distances. You know, obviously, say in Minnesota, it's too cold for us to grow a lot of fruit here, especially during the winter time. So what happens then, a place with warmer climates will grow the fruit, and they'll grow it until it's getting close to ripening, and then they'll put it in some sort of a container, and they'll add some ethylene gas to that container. So let's just say it takes 8 days for bananas to get here from Central America, or wherever. I'm not exactly sure where they're coming from, to be honest. They'll put ethylene gas in there, and then the plant will continue to ripen as it's traveling from, let's just say Mexico to the United States, and then from, up to the northern states. Okay, so it's a really important thing to be able to do that. Okay, gibberellins and cytokinins are hormones that make the cell division occur more quickly and makes the cells grow a little bit. Elongation kind of means like larger cells. Okay, the gibberellins and cytokinins, they are made happen in the roots, or they produced in the roots, and they cause the plant to grow faster, taller, whatever it happens to be for a particular plant. Sometimes in some plants, those hormones slow down the aging process. Okay, that's it for 10.3. I'm just going to keep on moving through that was it for 10.2. I'm going to keep moving on through 10.3 right now. So 10.3 is about plant reproduction. Hold on. Let me. Easy. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, 10.3 then is about how plants reproduce. There's a couple different ways that this happens. Asexual plant reproduction happens when plants can grow from just a few cells, or just a part of a plant or a stem. We'll get into the detail. You might need to pause it here because I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so grass is one of those things that can grow asexually, all right? When grass grows, you might throw down one seed of grass, and then as it grows, it has these rhizomes that grow out from the main root mass, and then a new plant grows up from there. As you can see in the picture here, this would be the main, and then the rhizomes grow, and then new plants offshoot from that one, from the initial one. So if you were planting a new lawn, and you threw grass seed down, you probably after a week or two would start to see little shoots coming up out of the ground. And then if you continue to water it, it may seem like, well, there's a little tuft of grass here, and there's one over here, and there's one, back here. Eventually, that will all start to fill itself in. If you end up overseeding, but I don't mean like overseed because they suggest that you do that. That's a landscaping process. But if you do that, hold on one second. So eventually those shoots will start to fill in. If you seed too much, then you can overcrowd your lawn, and you might have to thin it out or aerate the lawn after a certain amount of time. Okay, so that's for asexual plant reproduction. Sexual plant reproduction requires sperm and an egg. Remember, those are called gametes, and there's a male and a female egg, or the egg for the female, sperm for the male. Those two need to be brought together, and then through the process of fertilization, a new organism or a new plant then can grow from that. Now, some of them are what we call the diploid generation. Those are ones that reproduce via spore. Okay, so they produce spores, and this happens in seedless plants. Okay, so spores are daughter cells that are produced from haploid structures, so they have half of what they normally had. Okay, so sperm and egg, they unite, and then they can create a spore, and this happens in seedless plants. Okay, the male and female gametes are produced within the same plant. So when seed plants, that was seedless plants. Now, when seed plants go through reproduction, they produce what's called pollen, and they create pollen grains, and those are from tissues in the male reproductive structure of the plant. Okay, so pollen is from the male plant. There's protective outer covering on the pollen grain, and that's where the haploid sperm develops. And the pollen then is carried from one plant to another. And sometimes it happens with like a bumblebee or insects or birds, or sometimes just the wind alone is enough to transfer pollen from one plant to another. The sperm seed of the plants are carried, again, by gravity, wind, water, or little animals from one plant to the next. And then we call that process pollination. Okay, so the transfer of pollen grains to the female part of the plant. Okay. So the ovule then is the area on the plant that houses the egg. Okay, and so the ovule is where the haploid egg is made. After pollination happens, that sperm enters the ovule, and fertilization occurs, and then the embryo or the new plant is starting to develop. Okay, that embryo then is the immature diploid plant, meaning that it has means two, so it has the chromosomes or the genetic material from both the mother and the father so the diploid plant to the offspring of the parent plants. Okay, so the seed then that's produced is a combination of the embryo, right? So the genes from the mother and the father, a food supply, and a protective outer covering. So when you plant a seed, that seed, once the appropriate hormones are activated, it tells that seed to start the germination process, and plants start to grow. Well, they can't do photosynthesis yet because they're in the ground, they're not getting sunlight. So what they end up doing then is they have energy stored in the seed itself, and that energy is what the plant uses until it can develop its leaves and start doing photosynthesis. In gymnosperms or cone-bearing plants, it works a little bit differently. This is flowerless seed plants. Gymnosperm literally means a naked seed, and those seeds are not surrounded by a fruit. Okay, so we're thinking about cones from like pine trees. Okay, And this is mostly conifer plants. The cone is, sorry, that needs to go away there. The cone is both male and female structure, and the seed forms at the base of each of the scales. Okay, so each of these little things is the scale. In angiosperms, it's a little bit different, and maybe you remember from elementary the different parts of the reproductive parts of plants. The stamen is the male reproductive organ. Okay, here's the stamen, and it consists of both the anther, which is the top, and the filament. Okay, this is where the pollen is going to be and is going to be collected. And then the pistil, which is a combination of the stigma, the style, which is the long stocky part. The stigma is the top, but here's the pistil. And then the ovary, which is down at the base of the pistil. So pollen gets carried from the anther of the stamen of one plant to another plant, and then pollination occurs. The pollen tube then grows from the pollen grain into the stigma and down the style to the ovary, okay? That sperm then develops, the pollen tube enters into the ovule, and fertilization occurs. The fruit then is just the ovary of the flower that develops and contains one or more of the seeds. So if you think like a peach or an apple or whatever, there's the seeds you can see right there. Or like if it's a peach, it would be the pit. There's a lot of different ways that those seeds get dispersed. Sometimes the wind will pick up the seeds and blow them from one place to another. We talked about this a little bit in the previous chapter. Sometimes animals, like for thistles and cockleburs and things like that, they'll attach themselves to like dogs or your clothes or whatever, and they'll just get carried around from one place to another until they actually drop off. Things like coconut, they get transported by the wind and waves. So like, you know, in an area where you might have coconut trees is probably an island, and those coconuts can make their way into the ocean or the water system, and they can go from one place to another and then eventually start to grow. So there's lots of different ways that we can, that they can be distributed. All right, and that is it. That's it for the chapter. If you guys have questions, please let me know. Email me, call me, shoot, you know, try and get me on video chat, whatever it happens to be. If you have questions, let's connect, and hope you're keeping up on your worksheets and you're doing well and staying healthy. All right. Until the next time, we'll see you guys later.